After Democrats swept major elections in New York City, New Jersey and Virginia on Tuesday night, a famous GOP operative had some harsh words for President Donald Trump. Karl Rove, best known for his role in former President George W. Bush's election wins, scolded Trump in a post-election Wall Street Journal column, writing, "To turn this around, the White House will need to focus on the economy and the cost of living, speak candidly about challenges, lower expectations, temper the rhetoric, under-promise, over-deliver, and stop going too far, like with immigration and customs enforcement roundups at Home Depot."
He also wrote, "The GOP has to learn that screaming communist and socialist at run-of-the-mill Democrats doesn't move even die-hard MAGA voters. Explaining why a Democrat's policies will raise costs or hurt jobs and offering a constructive, forward-looking agenda is a much better approach. Americans want to know Republicans are making life more affordable, communities safer, and the economy stronger."
Separately, a Wall Street Journal editorial titled "Democrats Start Their Comeback" declared, quote, "The era of MAGA triumphalism should be over following Tuesday's elections." So we were talking briefly about the Karl Rove thing off camera, and I think you said you half agree with him, or you slightly agree with him, or something to that effect. So why don't you tell me how that works?
It's a real bummer to agree with anything Karl Rove says, but I think he's right about the economy and affordability issue. Yeah. That was obviously a big driver of Democrats' wins on Tuesday, and the White House has been, as I mentioned earlier in the show, focused a lot on foreign conflict, which is wonderful, right? Like, peace deals are fantastic. Everybody loves a peace deal, but the reason Trump was elected was for the economy and the idea of putting America first. Mm-hmm. And so there needs to be a focus back towards domestic policy as we go into the midterm elections in order for Republicans to perform well. And James Blair, who was the political director on the Trump campaign and now one of the senior officials in the Trump White House, said this in an interview with Politico's Dasha Burns, where he said that Trump is going to focus more on affordability. They recognize that this is an issue. Trump is aware of this, and that's going to be a major focus for the next year. I don't know why it wasn't before, and I think the White House does have a case to make that the economy is trending in the right direction. One of the sort of sticking points is that inflation has been relatively constant. It's obviously much lower than it was during the previous administration on average. The CPI is starting to come down. But they also have issues with labor shortages, right? The job market doesn't seem great, but egg prices have come down, milk prices have come down, beef prices are still an issue. But overall, the Fed cut rates recently. Things are looking like they are sort of moving in a better place. We've avoided the predictions of a recession thus far. So I think that they have metrics and statistics that they can use to say we are making the economy better, but this is sort of a long-term game. Obviously, what happens with the Supreme Court ruling on tariffs will make a big difference. There's a full year before the midterm elections. So I think there's time for them to make that case. It's not like the economy is in completely dire straits right now, but that just hasn't been a major messaging focus from the Trump administration and from really the Republican Party. And they need to do that in order to perform well in the midterms. And we can get into what I disagree with him on and plenty of other things, but I'll let you go.
So in relation to the James Blair interview that you mentioned, I found that very interesting because he was pretty candid in talking about the need to talk about affordability a lot more than they have been doing. He didn't exactly explicitly admit to error in terms of the messaging, but it was certainly implied that they had spent, I think, too long talking about other things. So it's just interesting from a political standpoint that he was willing to say that, and that obviously is something that there's a real awareness of in the White House. As far as the economy, I think it's in a bit, well, I would characterize it in a bit more of a delicate position, I think, than you would, because inflation, the last figures had it at 3%, which was pretty much where it was when Trump came in January. Now, during the Biden administration, of course, it was much higher, but it has proven, for one reason or another, quite sticky at around that 3% margin. True. And so that has, I think, bothered voters a lot who are still reeling from the shock of it being at, I think it was 9.1 was its peak or somewhere
I think
around.
Prices went up 25% over the full term.
Right. So, you know, things like that cause real pain to people.
Definitely.
And when you look at opinion polls that test Trump issue by issue, even though 3% is middling inflation, his poll ratings on that issue are really very bad. And so that, I think, speaks to your point, him being elected, at least in some part, by people who wanted him to bring prices down. And we can have the whole debate about tariffs. You and I have talked about that a lot before, and exactly what is causing inflation to stick around, not go up, to be fair, but stay there. But those are problems for him. And when it comes to people casting their votes in last Tuesday, or this Tuesday's elections, obviously that fed in, I think, to the level of dissatisfaction with some voters in the middle ground.
Yeah, and James Blair also said in that interview, he called out Jack Ciattarelli and Winsome Sears by name and said that Jack was not really talking about affordability in the way that Mikey Sherrill was. It was every single one of her advertisements. He focused on things like energy costs, but didn't really hammer home that issue, instead trying to really tie Mikey Sherrill to Phil Murphy. And then in Virginia, Winsome Sears ran a lot of ads on the transgender issue, which worked in Virginia in 2021 because it was a very unique political environment. But when you're in the midst of a government shutdown, that doesn't have the same salience for voters as it did 4 years ago. And I think he was right on both of those points. I also think the GOP shouldn't necessarily panic and turn into like chickens with their heads cut off. These are both blue states. Youngkin was very much an anomaly in Virginia, and I think gave people sort of false expectations about what could be accomplished there for the GOP. The margins were larger than people expected. It's also the year after, a Republican president gets elected. Republicans who support what Trump is doing probably feel pretty content right now. They're not super motivated to go out and vote. He also built a coalition of low and mid-prop voters, which require a lot of resources in order to turn out to the polls. So it's not super surprising that Republican turnout might have been depressed, that people weren't super excited to go out and vote against these Democrats in blue states where they kind of probably assumed that the books were cooked, so to speak. What I disagree with Karl on is that he suggests that basically Trump should get mushier with his agenda, to water it down to some extent to make voters feel more comfortable. And I do think that ignores the fact that he was not mushy at all on the campaign trail, right? And managed to win an election pretty handily, especially in the swing states, against Kamala Harris by really promising to deliver on a lot of these things. So it's sort of damned if you do and damned if you don't, because if Trump waters down the agenda, maybe you grab some of those people in the middle who are uncomfortable with raids at Home Depot, but do you lose the ability to really turn out your base in the midterm elections, right? Yeah. And does it give Democrats the opportunity to say that Trump isn't delivering on his promises? So to me, it feels a bit like Karl Rove doesn't like the Trump agenda, and he's trying to make a strategic point as to why Trump shouldn't continue to execute on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting when one talks about the Trump agenda, and I know we're going to be out of time shortly, but I think there's a difference between the policy, say in terms of tariffs, or for that matter in terms of immigration, and the kind of approach that pertains, to my mind, to a sort of consolidation of power. And some more libertarian conservatives have problems with that as it pertains to, say, the strikes in the Caribbean, or Trump doing things that are just about having a very expansive definition of what a president can do outside of Congress. And I think that is one of the reasons why, for example, in the No Kings protest, you had lots of people out there who are not of the hard left or not of the professional protest type, but actually people objecting to that degree of the Trump agenda. It's certainly true that Karl Rove is a remnant of the Republican Party that got overrun by the MAGA forces. And so he has an ideological objection, I think, to what Trump stands for anyway.
Yeah, so I think when people hear that from Karl Rove, when Republicans hear that from Karl Rove, they're going to say, well, of course he wants Trump to do that, right?
He would say that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, that's probably...
I have so much to say about the No Kings protest, but another time. All right, Sydney Sweeney spoke out on the controversial American Eagle ad that she was in over the summer. We'll hear what she had to say after this.